Among the challenges facing the new administration in Washington, one of the most important is to reduce or even eradicate poverty. We have a better chance of success in fighting poverty if the decisions are based on the reality of poverty in America and not on widely held myths. Today I'd like to discuss 3 of these myths about poverty. The first is that poverty is a matter of race. Most African Americans, most blacks are poor, and most poor are blacks. That's the myth. The second myth is that poverty is a generational curse. If your parents were poor, you'll be poor and your children will be poor. And finally, the third myth is that the poor have no agency, that the poor are victims of large impersonal forces. Myth number 1. Many people believe that poverty in the United States is fundamentally a matter of race. And this used to be true. In 1940, it was estimated that 87% of black families lived in poverty, were below the poverty line. But is it still true? The poverty threshold varies by family size and composition. In 2019, if you were single and under 65 years of age, the poverty threshold was $13,300. A single man or single woman earning less than $13,300 was considered to be poor. For a family of 4 with 2 children under 18 years of age, the poverty line was $25,900. So what is the current story? In 2019, most blacks were not poor. Only 18.8% of blacks were below the poverty line. In other words, 4/5, over 80% of African Americans in the United States were not poor. Secondly, most poor are not black, or were not black in 2019. There were 8.1 million blacks below the poverty line, which is only 24%, which is only 1/4 of all the poor in the country. So the reality is that most blacks are not poor, and most poor are not black. The second myth is that poverty is a generational trap. If your parents were poor, then you are poor, and your children will be poor. If this is true, then income inequality becomes a much more serious issue if some families are stuck in poverty for generations. One way of examining this issue is to divide the population into 5 groups, into quintiles. The lowest quintile, would be the 20% of the population with the lowest incomes. The second quintile would be the 20% of the population with higher incomes all the way up. In 2019, the average income of people in the lowest quintile, the lowest 20%, was $15,300 a year. Most of the people in the lowest quintile are below the poverty line. The average income for the second quintile, the next 20%, was $40,700, and just for interest, the income of people in the highest quintile was $254,000. What do the results show? Are people stuck in the lowest quintile, or do people have an opportunity to escape or transition to higher levels of income? The data is fairly optimistic. Even in a period of time as short as 3 years, 31% of the persons who were in the lowest quintile 3 years ago are in a higher quintile, 2, 3, 4, or 5, in a higher quintile now, escape from poverty. In fact, 2% of the people who were in the lowest quintile 3 years ago now have gotten into the highest quintile, the one with the average income of $254,000. Over a decade, the results are even better. Over 10 years, 58% of the persons who were below the poverty line, who were in the lowest quintile, are now above, have escaped from poverty. 58%, more than half. If you go to generations, the effect is stronger yet. Now, this result of escaping from poverty is consistent with another piece of data, which is 84% of Americans have a higher income, adjusting for inflation. 84% of Americans have a higher income than their parents. That you at age 40, the average 84% of the people at age 40 have a higher income than their parents had when their parents were at age 40. The myth is not true. Poverty is not a generational trap. Myth number 3 is that the poor are poor because of large economic forces beyond their control. In other words, the poor lack agency. There's no choices they can make to avoid poverty. President Clinton asked William Galston to study these personal choices that people could make to allow someone to avoid being poor. Since then, there's been a lot of research done by economists on both the left and the right. The data that I'm going to use is from the Brookings Institute. I think you'd have to consider them a center-left organization, definitely not a right-wing organization. But the Brookings Institute concluded that there were 3 choices that were critical to avoiding poverty. First, graduate from high school. Even if it's a poor high school, make it through to graduation. Second, upon graduation, work full-time, even if you initially are working at the minimum wage. And third, don't get married until you're 21 years of age, and don't have children before you're married. If you follow these 3 rules, graduate from high school, work full-time, even if initially at the minimum wage, don't get married until you're 21, and don't have children until you're married. If you follow these 3 rules, then according to the Brookings Institute, the probability that you'll fall below the poverty line, that you'll be poor as an adult, is 2%, 1 chance out of 50. The positive interpretation is that if you follow these 3 rules, you have a 75% chance that as an adult you'll be earning $55,000 or more. How about the negative? What if you violate all 3 rules? If you violate all 3 rules, then the numbers are reversed. Your odds are bad. If you violate all 3 rules, you have a 76% chance that you'll end up poor, that you'll end up in that bottom quintile. So there is the idea that the poor are poor because of large economic forces, that they have no choice, they have no options, is also a myth. You can make choices. Teenagers can make choices. Graduate from high school, work full-time, avoid pregnancy until married, don't get married until 21. Those 3 choices will pretty much eliminate your chance of falling below the poverty line in the rest of your life. To summarize, to correct the 3 myths: most blacks are not poor, most poor are not black. Second, poverty is not a permanent condition. Over a period of time as short as 10 years, a majority escape from poverty. And finally, third, whether you're poor is in part a matter of bad choices.